morning, good afternoon. It's so wonderful to see everybody. Welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn session. We are so grateful to have you here. If I have not met you yet, my name is Reba Elliott, and I'm so grateful to work for Great Old Bras for Wilderness, along with all of our members and broadband leaders and staff and all of you good, lovely people. Our subject today is the Congressional Review Act, and today has been a very exciting day for the Congressional Review Act. There is new movement that this maneuver is being used in a way that's very detrimental now to the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. So we have picked a day unintentionally that is a little bit of a thrilling, horrible, kind of like you're at the top of the roller coaster and you know what's coming next kind of day. But we are so grateful that Steve Bloch is here with us. Steve is leading some of the legal actions against the Congressional Review Act from SUA, our friends at SUA, and really, really grateful for his expertise. So Steve will give us a little bit of an overview of the act and what's going on now with it. We also have two local leaders, so grateful that Barbara and Reggie are here. Reggie from Minnesota, where this act has been used against the Boundary Waters, and Barb from Utah, where Grand Staircase Escalante is now under threat. So Reggie and Barb will share a little bit about their stories and what they're hearing locally. Steve needs to leave about halfway through because he has superhero stuff to do. So we will pause after Steve for questions. So if you're while you're listening to Steve would like to ask a few questions, please put them in the chat. If you could please put your questions in the chat and we will ask them after Steve is done. And then we'll have time as well after Barb and Reggie. So same thing, if you hear questions you'd like to follow up with Barb and Reggie, please put those questions in the chat as well. And we will wrap up today with information about what we can all do. So I will pass now to Steve. Steve, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Reba. Thank you all for your time and attention for tuning in. I'm going to add two sort of caveats to what you heard from Reba. One, I feel incredibly scattered, as you'll hear as you'll hear me talk about this attack against the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument is happening in real time, and that has made this already an exciting day. So thank you for your grace and your patience with me if I lose track for a moment. Okay, so let's go to the first slide, Sally.
Okay,
Yeah, I see them up here. Let's go to the next one, please.
Okay. Let me see where I'm at here. There we go.
Maybe the next one after that. Sorry, that was for a little color for you. Okay, so I just wanted to sort of set the stage for everybody. I suspect I've met some, but I don't know all of you. Again, my name is Steve Bloch. I am the legal director at the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, or SUA, in Salt Lake City. SUA, founded in 1983. We have a national membership. Our headquarters are here in Salt Lake City, which is where I work. We have offices in Moab and Washington, D.C., and some folks who work in the field for us in Chicago and Portland, Oregon. SUA's focus is America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, the conservation of roughly 8.5 million acres of unprotected Bureau of Land Management lands. That's an agency inside of the Interior Department as wilderness. And this is a larger part of what we call the Protect Wild Utah movement. We do a mix of offense and defense. Obviously, in times like this, we play a lot of defense. And with all of your help, are hopefully holding the line. I've been at SUA since 1999, this is not my first rodeo, but yet I am like surprised every day with this administration and some of the things we're up against. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so like you heard Reba say, we're here to talk about the Congressional Review Act, but with a specific focus, I think, about the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. So I thought I would just further set the stage for a moment and remind everybody about what it is we're talking about. The staircase it's in southwestern Utah, first established in 1996 by President Bill Clinton, a part of your quintessential Southern Utah Red Rock country, world-class geology, fossil resources, sacred sites and cultural resources, unique plants and animals found no place else in the world except in the Grand Staircase. If you haven't been there, I'd encourage you to go down. It is just stunning and remarkable and almost hard to sort of imagine this landscape scale at roughly 1.9 million acres of federal public land. So the entire monument, with the exception of a few small inholdings of private land, are federal public lands, which is what we're going to be talking about, owned by all Americans, managed on their behalf by the Interior Department. From the get-go, the state of Utah in 1996 opposed to the staircase and the establishment of it. Why? I think it really boils down to getting to who is calling the shots on federal public lands in Utah. That sounds a little simplistic. It might sound a little glib almost, but I really think that that's an accurate distillation of what's going on here. We may talk about that there are some mineral resources inside of the Grand Staircase, things like some coal resources. There may be some rare earth minerals and things like that, but that is not what's really driving these attacks on the Grand Staircase. It is Utah politicians, folks like Senator Mike Lee, Representative Celeste Malloy, who we'll talk about, and their fundamental rejection of the fact that federal public lands are owned by all Americans, and Utahns have a very important voice in how they should be managed, but it's not the only voice. How did we get to 1.9 million acres? There were some school trust lands that the state of Utah managed within the Grand Staircase. Those were swapped out. The state of Utah acquired some other lands in the state, as well as a large check from the federal treasury. So there are no there are no state trust lands anymore in the monument. There were some pre-existing coal leases that the American government helped to buy out. So none of those left in the monument. And what we have in now is this remarkable landscape that is the economic engine for this part of southwestern Utah. Local towns like Escalante and Boulder and Kanab have grown up now around the Grand Staircase, and their economies are so closely intertwined with the monument. Let's go to the next slide. So monument established in 1996, and we were all kind of bubbling along until the first Trump administration, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration. There were many legal fights from 1996 through 2016 about the fate of the Grand Staircase. But we were able to successfully defend the monument, and as I said a moment ago, it has really become an integral part of the fabric of southwestern Utah. In 2017, President Trump, as I suspect all of you know, attacked the Grand Staircase and Bears Ears National Monuments. He dismantled both with regard to the Grand Staircase, reducing the monument from 1.9 million acres to 1 million acres, and causing a lot of uncertainty about how to manage and protect that place. In 2021, the monument was restored to its full and original size by President Biden. And in 2025, the Bureau of Land Management, who's the federal land management agency who oversees the Grand Staircase, finalized a monument management plan for how to manage all 1.9 million acres. The Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument Intertribal Coalition, which is a coalition of 6 tribal nations, has formed and coalesced around the monument. These are nations who have lived in and around but is now the Grand Staircase for time immemorial, and who had a loud voice in coming up with the management plan that was finalized in 2025 and are dedicated to the protection of the plan and of the place. The state of Utah has not, has continued to uh, challenge the monument. There is active litigation that they've brought seeking to undo Biden's restoration. They've lost the first round. The second round in the appeals court has been sort of hanging there for a few years. So all that brings us to where we are now, which is in February 2026, the Biden proclamation is in place and it guides management for the 1.9 million acres. The Biden era management plan finalized in 2025 helps to implement the proclamation on the ground and sets out the management and conservation of the resources within the monument. But there are two significant threats. One that we'll talk about at some length here about the Congressional Review Act, this obscure law that the Republicans in this Congress have leveraged to attack land management planning on public lands. And I would be remiss if I didn't note that we're also keeping a very wary eye on the White House. That would be the bookend for what we'll talk about with the attack on the management plan through the Congressional Review Act would be the potential for President Trump to issue another proclamation which would reduce the monument boundaries again. And I don't know that any of us have a lot of insight into his mind, but I think that that's certainly something we're watching for. Okay, let's go into the next slide, please. Maybe one more, and one more after that, I think. So those were just slides of, what is the 2021 proclamation from Biden and then the 2025 plan. Okay, so the Congressional Review Act, the main thing we're here to talk about is this obscure law that Congress passed in 1996. That's the Newt Gingrich era. The point of the law is to allow Congress to look back at rules that were passed by a prior administration. So what does that mean in practice? We all know that when administrations turn over, there's like a flurry of activity that often happens, right? If it's Biden, if it's Trump or Obama or Bush, there's a flurry of activity that happens in the last days of an administration. And this law was intended to allow the Congress that came after. So think about a Congress that comes after like a presidential election to look back on some of the rules that federal agencies had passed in the last few days of the administration. Rules, again, are, when we normally think about that term, it would be rules and regulations are kind of synonymous. These are things that federal agencies pass through formal notice and comment rulemaking. Think about when the Environmental Protection Agency issues rules for like fuel efficiency standards, or the Food and Drug Administration has rules about like certifying foods as organic. Those are, I think, a couple of examples of what maybe were intended when Congress had passed the CRA that could be reviewed. The CRA typically works when there's alignment in single party control of both Congress and the White House. So like we have now with Republicans in the White House and controlling Congress, and like we had, frankly, in 2021 when the Democrats won the White House and controlled both houses of Congress for a moment. let me think about where I want to go with this for a second. So I talked about how rules as the law was passed were understood to be these notice and comment rules, sort of obscured by administrative agencies. Well, Republicans in Congress have always aspired to make the Congressional Review Act a little more broad in application. And specifically, they have had an eye on land management plans from the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. That's not how people think about those plans. We don't think about land management plans by these federal agencies as rules, but the Republicans do. And they have managed to convince career staff who work at the General Accountability Office, or the GAO, which is an arm of Congress, that land management plans are rules as well. And you might say, well, all right, I'm not, who cares? Who cares what the GAO says if it's a rule or not? I've never even heard of the GAO. So that matters here because when the GAO issues an opinion, when a member of Congress asks for the GAO's opinion, is a land management plan a rule? And the GAO writes back and says, yes, we think it is. So the two things. One, there's nothing any of us can do about that. There's no appeal from that kind of a decision. More importantly, that opinion is the key for Republicans to use to open the door to try and undo that plan. So normally, I just talked a minute ago about how federal agencies have rules, and the CRA was used to look back at the rules. Well, the GAO opinion creates another path for Congress to use this law and undo a land management plan through use of this law. Not what it was intended for, but this is kind of how the Republicans have twisted the law to be used for. And again, so I'm clear with you all, this is something that Republicans have had on their mind for years. This is the first Congress, this 119th Congress is the first Congress that is using the Congressional Review Act in this way, using it to try and undo land management plans. Let's pause for 1 second just so we're all on the same page. Land management plans, I'm going to focus on ones that the Bureau of Land Management produces. These are plans required by Congress by the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, or FLPMA. That's the organic statute for the Bureau of Land Management. So in this law, Congress told the Bureau of Land Management, you need to produce land management plans for all the lands that you manage. Those plans are sort of set the rules of the road. They do things like say what lands are going to be available for off-road vehicle use, or what lands could be leased for oil and gas, or what lands are appropriate for recreation. They're the rules of the road for the public and for the agency for how to manage certain tracts of land. They provide certainty and predictability for how public lands are managed. The BLM works with the public and stakeholders to produce the plans. I'm going to bet that many of you are familiar with this and have commented on or attended meetings where the BLM was asking for public input on a land management plan. It's a real collaborative sort of process. I was just saying to somebody this morning, listening is not the same. Sometimes you hear people critique final plans as you didn't listen to me because the plan doesn't do everything I wanted. Well, listening and doing everything you wanted are not the same thing. So the public is heard in the land management planning process, and that input is kind of weighed against any number of factors, right? Um, the land management plans stay in place for decades. So these really do provide the blueprint and the foundation for how to manage tracts of federal land. The land management plan for the Grand Staircase, the first plan, was finished in 2000, and that was in place for 20 years. There are land management plans in Utah that have been in place for 30 plus years. So really important for how important tools that BLM uses and knows how to manage our federal lands, and that the public understands what the rules of the road are. Okay, nevertheless, this Congress, like I said, has for the first time leveraged this law, the Congressional Review Act, to try and undo these plans, not by the normal process, which would be the Bureau of Land Management to say, we're going to start a new planning process, we're going to arrive at a different roadmap. And instead, that might be the scalpel approach, and instead they're taking the hatchet. The Congressional Review Act is the hatchet. It's a very crude tool that will strike down a plan and kind of salt the earth behind it. So BLM and is not able to produce a plan that is substantially the same in the future. If Congress is successful in using the Congressional Review Act, it not only undoes the plan, but by law, BLM cannot rely on a new plan that is substantially the same. You can't so it's kind of the nuclear, I think of it as a bit of the nuclear option. Not let's have a better plan, but there's just going to be, they're kind of wiping this plan off the face of the earth. Congress has done this 6 times. This Republican Congress has used this law 6 times in 2025 to undo 6 land management plans. None have been national monuments, but there are plans in Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Alaska. There were close votes in the House and the Senate, but ultimately Congress voted to use the Congressional Review Act and undo those plans. As I say, it only takes, this is another sort of insidious aspect of the Congressional Review Act. It only takes a simple majority in each house. The filibuster in the Senate is not an option when Congress is using the Congressional Review Act and acts on an expedited time frame. So the fallback of, oh, we're not going to do it this way because senators will stand up and they don't have 60 votes. That's not an option under the Congressional Review Act. Okay, where are we now with regards to the Grand Staircase? So we talked about how the monument was restored in 2021. The plan was finished in 2025. Representative Celeste Malloy from Southwestern Utah last year in secret asked the General Accountability Officer, GAO, for its opinion whether the staircase plan was a rule and subject to the Congressional Review Act. And in January of this year, the GAO said, yes, it is. In real time, meaning yesterday, Senator Mike Lee from Utah laid the groundwork for the introduction of resolutions of disapproval. I'm sorry, there's like this one small step that has to happen. You take the GAO opinion, this sounds like very arcane, and you read it into the congressional record. It's not that he actually stood on the floor of the Senate and read it in, but he, hands it over to somebody and they note it. And that sets the stage for what's happening today, which is Lee and Malloy are in real time introducing resolutions of disapproval for the grand staircase plan. And so the race is on, the fight is on. We expect there to be action on the House floor, Senate floor within days, if not within a few weeks. Let's go to the next slide, please. Let's go to the next one. Oh, the next one. There we go. So let's go back one. So this is where we need you all to step up, and we need your and everybody in your network's help. And I know Reba's going to talk about this a little bit on the back end, but I'm going to just plug that we need your voices loud and clear to your members of Congress, to your senators, and frankly, more importantly, to your members of Congress in the House of Representatives to vote no on the resolutions of disapproval. If the resolutions pass, like Lee and Malloy want, the 2025 staircase plan that manages the Grand Staircase Escalante to a very high standard, the way you would manage a national monument, will be undone. And it is not clear what's going to come in its place. It's not clear how those lands and objects are going to be managed. And so we need to win this fight in the halls of Congress. Let's go to the next slide. And if you live in one of these states or have friends in one of these states, I would encourage you to reach out to SUA's organizing team. And it may be that you reach out to Sally or Reba and they put you in touch with us. But we have identified members of Congress in each of the states you see lit up on the screen. And there are members of Congress in each of those states who are just the key to defeating this in Congress. Let's go to the next slide. And there's the list. I know, Reba, you were asking for it. Sorry, that's where, so that's where it is. On that list, Mr. Gonzalez from Texas, we've taken him off. He may be stepping down from Congress, having some other issues. Let's go to the last slide. Okay, so that's a ton of information. I really think the high level sort of takeaway is this is an obscure law and a sneaky way to attack a land management plan that Congress intended to be a very durable tool that federal agencies use to manage federal public lands. And Congress has used this 6 times in the past year, but this attack on the Grand Staircase is a huge escalation of that fight. And if they can do it here in Utah, and if they can successfully overturn a monument management plan here, it feels like the sky's the limit. And so we are absolutely working to draw the line in the sand and say, not here, not now. And that's why contacting your member of Congress in the House, the Senate is just so important, and telling them to vote no on this. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. Can we all please give a round of applause, a hand on our hearts, a hug, something to Steve for that kind of amazing. Thank you so much, Steve, for being able to organize your thoughts on such a difficult day. It's really, really very much appreciated. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Steve has to leave in exactly 1 minute, but maybe, Steve, we could have just a quick question.
Yeah.
So the first question is, laws are changed. So can this one be changed in the future?
Well, and the answer is yes. And I think people are, it's obviously going to take a couple of, well, the answer is yes. I think people need to, Republicans are going to need to understand that by undoing land management plans, if it's the staircase or in areas that have a lot of, for example, oil and gas or grazing activity on them, that by using the CRA and this really blunt tool, it creates a lot of uncertainty. And so it's not only folks like us who care about like the protection of a place like Grand Staircase, it's regulated industry who really want certainty in how to operate on federal public lands. And that by opening this can of worms, uh, Congress is making life very uncertain for everyone who has interest on federal public lands. So I think the way Congress is using this will hopefully set the stage that they're willing to revisit the law. I can take one more if you want, Reba. You
Thank
want
you
to
so
choose
much,
one
Steve.
there?
That's awesome. So I'm going to kind of summarize Lauren's question is a really smart question that the management plans for these areas were tailored very carefully to comply with a number of rules. So how is it possible to make a new one that complies with those rules?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something we're all kind of struggling with. We're really in uncharted waters. I mean, like I said, for the first time in 2025, Congress used the Congressional Review Act to undo those six plans in those other states. The dust has not settled yet for what's going to happen next. I think you will see if you follow what Representative Malloy, Senator Lee are going to be saying in the press that they're trying to take it back to the 2020 plan, the Trump era plan for the Grand Staircase. There is not a clean line that takes you from undoing, or a straight line that takes you from undoing the Biden plan in 2026 and returning management to the much worse Trump plan from 2020. I know that's what they're saying is going to happen, but it is not clear that that's the case. And even if it is the case, um, that plan is much worse for the resources on the ground. And I'm sorry, and then the sort of specific point that Lauren raises, substantially the same. We just don't know the answer yet for what sort of plan the BLM is going to make that would meet that standard. Um, and where Congress has told BLM you need to have land management plans in place to manage all the tracts of federal land that you oversee, what does it mean if they're not allowed to produce a plan that's substantially the same? It's going to be a great issue for law professors to write about, and it's going to be it's sort of a make work exercise for attorneys. So we'll see how that is. And then final point, I didn't see this question asked, but I know from some other talks people are thinking about this. What kind of recourse is there in the courts if Congress goes this route? And the answer is, I don't want to say never, but this is pretty close to never. There's a provision in the law that takes jurisdiction away from the courts. And so you're not able to challenge, well, he's not easily able to challenge what Congress is doing here. If they pass resolutions of disapproval, if the president signs that, it is very close to impossible to undo that through the courts. So never say never, but much better to defeat it in Congress in the first instance.
Thank you so much for that horribly depressing presentation, Steve. It's very, very sobering, very, very sobering, but it's good to know. It's good to know because that makes our action today even more important. So really, really grateful for your clarity about that, Steve. And thank you so much for being here. Good luck with superhero stuff today, and we will be
All right.
supporting you. We'll be right behind you, Steve.
That's great. Thank you all.
Thank
Stay
you.
well.
Bye. Well, thanks to Steve for his being here. It's incredible that you all in the Great Old Bras for Wilderness Network is why Steve took time out of his day on a day like today to be here because he knows that you all are such strong actors and leaders. So thank you all for being the kinds of people that Steve feels comfortable trusting on a day like today. Steve gave us a kind of big picture overview, and now we're going to look at two different kind of case studies, two stories from on the ground, two local leaders who are really experiencing these issues firsthand. Our first is Reggie Weber, our wonderful Reggie, who helps lead the Minnesota Wild Waters Broadband. So yes, Reggie, we would love to hear perspective from Minnesota, and please take it away. You're on. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thanks, Sally, for doing that. Um, yes, I kind of came into this a little bit later, but I have such a passion for water, living on lakes and by ponds and streams, probably the last 20 years on and off. And because Minnesota's state is the actual state itself is so water-based. We have so many watersheds and things like that. So if you look at this picture, one of the biggest things, which is actually where it says prove it first about the clean water, um, that Friends of the Boundary Waters have actually had one, two, three, four kind of um, bills, you say, that are trying to help with this not moving forward. And that first one is prove it first. So what that means, though, is that the applicant that is seeking to open this copper mine, sulfate copper mine, that has a similar mine that is operated and closed without causing pollution. So they have to show us that all the mines they've ever worked, and this company comes out of South America. So you can already understand what some of the issues that we're having with trying to keep that out. There's another bill that's out. I don't see it up here, but it's called the Bad Actor Bill. And what that means, it would prevent Minnesota from issuing non-ferrous mining permits to bad actors who have already violated laws with bribery and our natural resources destruction. So if there's a history that they've done that, they can't mine here. We don't want them anyway. Taxpayer protection is another one. So protecting our Minnesota taxpayers from the liability that if in case something would happen, what this is going to cost us. And that it's actually, it's an act, the Taxpayer Protection Act. And it would require non-ferrous, which is iron, mining companies to fully fund any financial assurance package, to fully fund packages up front so that Minnesota taxpayers are not going to be forced to have to correct our own environment. And then there's another bill called the Permanent Protection Bill. And this is just about keeping our boundary waters pristine. And this one obviously would prohibit copper nickel sulfite in mines on any state-owned land, especially up in the Rainy River, which is way up on the border there, because that watershed, like we've tried to tell, we met with our House representative, and for the district, and tried to really tell her that you can't, you have to put these simple things in plans. Once the damage is done, it's done. And you can't go back and fix it for the most part in these types of situations when it's affecting our water quality. And it's not just the water in our lakes. It gets, because we have so many watersheds, they're all intertwined. They're all moving in couple, north from south. Some go south to north. We have Canada. You get into the Great Lakes because that's where all these mines, the water just goes right into the Great Lakes. And then you are involving Canada. You have the whole Great Lakes out to the ocean. I was even telling our representative that it's not just that. We also have the Mississippi River, which is the mouth of the starting point of the Mississippi River, and it picks up two other rivers from Wisconsin and another major one and flows all the way down into the Gulf. Now, how many people and lands are affected by going all the way down the Mississippi River and all the way out to the ocean? I mean, that's a ton. And yes, it would happen over time, but we shouldn't even start that. So it is a really, I think these four bills that they proposed was just amazing. And it was a great rally. We had tons and tons of people there, which was so nice. So Sally, I don't know if there's anything more you want me to say about this.
No, that's wonderful, Reggie. Thank you so much. It's really useful to see how the people, your neighbors and friends are kind of fighting against this desecration of a really beautiful sacred place. So thank you so much for sharing that. And if anyone has questions for Reggie, we'll hear from Barbara in just a moment, but if anyone has questions for Reggie, um, is this is widely known? Is there a kind of widespread pushback? What was the response from any of the people that she spoke with? Please put those questions in the chat. After Reggie speaks, we'll have Barbara, and then after Barbara, we'll have time for questions. So if you're curious at all about this local state level action, please put it into the chat. And thank you for sharing, Reggie. Really, really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me do that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your story. So now we will hear from Barbara McConville is from the Greater Wasatch Broadband in Utah, and will share how how these maneuvers are being received by people around her. The news from today that Steve shared is brand new, but would be grateful to hear, Barbara. Yeah, how are things going in Utah?
Oh, thank you so much, Reba, and thanks for everybody that's listening in. And Reggie, I have to say, I'm really jealous that you actually have people within your legislative body that are trying to protect your waters, because it's pretty much silence during our legislative session right now about what is happening nationally with Grand Staircase. But I kind of wanted to echo back to one of the things that Steve said about Utah and Utah politics. He didn't come right out and say this, but a book that our Broad's book club read a while back was called The Sagebrush Rebellion. I don't know if any of you have read that, but it's written by Jonathan Thompson. And I need to read you a little bit of what he said in one of his chapters, because I think it kind of explains a little bit about Utah politics. And what he said was he was discussing the Hole in the Rock Trail that's located right in the heart of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, and how it became a real icon for Mormon lore. And the expedition had taken on some of the most rugged, and this is a quote, rugged and remote terrain in the nation. Its members drilled, chiseled, and blasted a wagon road into the cliff. And then they suffered through a very challenging winter camping season. And they came out the other end somewhat intact. And you can still go to that spot where they chiseled through the rock, and it now drops down into Lake Powell. It originally dropped down into the Colorado River. So what they said is they believed that gave them the right to the land that they had conquered. Now, Celeste Malloy, who's our Utah representative from Southeast Utah, as Steve referenced, is the champion of the CRA, and she's also the niece through marriage of Cliven Bundy and the cousin of Anon Bundy. Now, Cliven was the one that refused to pay his grazing fees, at Bunkerville, and there was a armed standoff with the BLM. I'm sure some of you remember that. His son was involved in the wildlife refuge in Oregon and the standoff there. So that's kind of where she's coming from as far as her relationships. And then Senator Lee, he's the great-great-grandson of John D. Lee, who was one of the first territorial judges in Utah in the mid-1800s. His grandfather was actually hung in 1877 because of his involvement in the Mountain Meadows massacre, where 30 plus immigrants were slaughtered because they were traveling through Utah. So those are our two big representatives that are championing this cause. Now, as far as my experience with Grand Staircase, you can see by the photos, I visited there several times with a lot of different desert groups, including some of our Great Old Broads. I moved to Kanab in 1975, and Kanab is located on the Arizona Strip, for those of you that don't know, and it's partway between St. George and Lake Powell. But to the north of the city and Kane County is all of the Grand Staircase National Monument. So we moved there. My husband took a position with Utah State Parks. He was the park manager for Coral Pink Sand Dunes. So we had an opportunity at that time to explore the staircase long before it was the staircase. We had only been in Kanab for 2 weeks when we heard some commotion at the county courthouse, which was just a couple blocks away. And we later found out that what had happened there is they had hung Edward Abbey and Robert Redford in effigy and started them on fire. So that introduced us to the politics of Southern Utah. The reason they were being treated that way is their public opposition to the Kaperowitz Plateau coal plant that was destined for a plateau right in the heart of Grand Staircase. So this was 1975, and that monument has basically been under attack, long before 75 and ever since then. But I've so enjoyed my time in that monument. And for those of you that have not been in the deserts of Southern Utah, again, echoing Steve, get down there, the stargazing, the hiking. As you can see, this is on the left on the photos, one of our broads. I think she's on the call, actually, Janet Mueller in Spooky Canyon, which is a slot canyon. Also, the photo with the girls on the bottom right, that's in Willis Creek, another slot canyon in the staircase. Our camping group at Kodachrome Basin, which is a state park on the edge of the staircase, which I wonder, how are all these national parks and state parks going to be impacted by this rule? Because if the CRA can happen to a monument, it can also happen to a national park or any lands that have a resource management plan. But then I want to point out that bottom picture with my pup in the foreground. I mean, that's the staircase. It's huge, it's beautiful, it's wild. Discoveries you could make from finding Moki marbles, which are little iron encrusted sandstones, to petrified wood. Just the peace and quiet of the staircase is amazing. And then just one other comment, I noticed, I've been going there since 1975, as I said. After the monument was first instituted in 1996, throughout that time period, I know it was the Grand Canyon Trust got involved in buying up some grazing rights in the Escalante River drainage. And when I went there early on in the 70s and early 80s, that whole corridor was filled with cattle dung, deer flies, horse flies, everything ugly. Well, once the Grand Canyon Trust got in there, the grazing disappeared. They did a lot of work on removing Russian olives from the river edges. I was able to go back there probably 6 or 7 years ago. And what a huge difference they made. I mean, the grasses were tall, there were wildflowers everywhere, and there were no flies, there were no horse flies, there were no deer flies. And boy, to see that disappear because of what's happening right now is just tragic. So I know Reba's going to touch on this. I think I'm out of time, but I really, really encourage everybody to reach out to those representatives within your state that were identified in that spreadsheet. Very important. Done. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Barb. Really appreciate that. And if anyone has questions, if you don't mind putting them in the chat, that would be wonderful. Really, really appreciate Barb and Reggie both your sharing your photos, your stories, family genealogy. That kind of local perspective is so, so, so important. So super, super thank you. And I see Anne has her hand up. If Anne maybe has a question that can't be put into the chat. Anne, do you want to share what your question is?
Yeah, it's just real quick. I did put into the chat a link to an article that I found very informative about the boundary waters and the challenge that it's facing right now in relation to the Congressional Review Act. So if you want to just click on that and save it to your computer, you can look at it later. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you, thank you. I am a little bit curious if no one has any other questions. If you do have questions, please for Reggie or Barbara, please put them in the chat. But I'm really curious, maybe first Barbara and then Reggie. It's always a challenge. People are having a hard time putting food on the table and they're worried about their insurance bills. It's sometimes tough to get people to really pay attention to these kinds of issues that we know have so much to do with job security and having clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. We know all that stuff, but it's hard sometimes to get others on the same page as we are. And I would love to just know, are you finding that these issues, because they're such, highly visible, kind of emotionally resonant public lands, are you finding that they're getting attention in a new way? Do you feel like there's kind of momentum around this issue that there hasn't been around other issues? Or are you feeling like, no, it's still an uphill battle? Like, there's still most people don't know what's going on here. It would just be great, and maybe just super briefly, Barbara, and then Reggie.
Oh, I absolutely don't think that people in Utah or the surrounding area have any clue that this is happening. It hasn't been discussed unless they're involved in an environmental group where it's come up. It's pretty much crickets. And I think our last public lands rally was last year, and I mean thousands of people came. But this has come on so quickly, and no, I think the bulk of the people do not understand it at all. I mean, it's hard enough for us to understand it, and we're seeing it firsthand all the time. So yeah, it's a little frightening.
Yeah. And all the more important the calls that hopefully we'll all make, which I can share about in just 1 second. But yeah, Reggie would love the perspective from Minnesota. Are you feeling like this is getting attention, or are you feeling no, it's still an uphill battle? Oh, you're on mute, Reggie.
I really think that it is getting attention. It seems like The Boundary Waters organization has been doing more and more work and more information sessions to the public. This isn't the first time they've been at the Capitol. I have, over the last several years, have seen them at the Capitol. And our head guy, the announcer, last night he was on the news. So it made the 6 o'clock our evening news last night, and they were showing some of the slides that Sally was so nice to put together. It is, but again, like in all the states, you still get people that just aren't active. They think, oh, it'll get fixed. I don't need to do anything, type thing. And then surprise, surprise, if it doesn't, and they're all upset. So yeah, I mean, I do understand. I think part of the people still don't care and they still don't get it. Probably up on the range is they don't want it and they don't care. They don't want to pay for it or anything. But the rest of the people, there's a lot of people that we really, really, so I think it was a good thing yesterday. But I think you need to have that type of involvement. You need to be on TV. You need to, it's sad to say, but if you're not, nobody hears about it.
Yeah. Yeah, those communications are so, so, so important.
Yeah.
Thank
You
you
don't,
all for sharing that. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I was just going to say, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all for sharing that. And same as with Steve, it's a um, not entirely heartening picture that's being painted, but it's good to know. Like this is the
Mhm.
reality of what we're facing. So this is so, so, so helpful and good to know. Um, I am going to thank you all so much for sharing those stories and those pictures. And can we, same you all, can we please do a little gesture of love for Reggie and Barbara? Can we do a round of applause or hands on our heart or jazz hands? Thank you all so, so,
Thank
so, so
you.
much. Really, really
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
it. Thank you all. Um, I'm going to just drop into the chat a document that will also be sent by email. So feel free to open it now, but know that it will come to you later. While you're looking at the chat, I just also want to note the link that Anne sent. Thank you, Anne, for sharing that link. A note from Jeannie, who has lived in the Boundary Waters area for such a long time, and from Dijon. So thank you all for sharing those notes. I am going to share my screen so that everyone can see this little document together. It's in the chat too, in case you want to open it. This is some information that you can use to call your senator. Given what we heard from Steve, that time is of the essence, we need to make these calls now. Given what we're hearing from Barbara and from Reggie, that there might be some awareness among environmental groups. Sounds like it's maybe a little bit farther ahead in Minnesota, very, very urgent in Utah and in Minnesota as well. It really does matter if we contact our members of Congress. They will vote on this if they think it is getting enough attention to be a factor in the elections that they'll all be facing at some point. So, as constituents, what we can do is call them and tell them we're paying attention, and we can get our friends and family to call and say we're paying attention. So, this little document is hopefully helpful to do that. So, you'll see that there's a little bit of an introduction here, just what's happening with the Congressional Review Act. Later on, we'll drop in a link to the recording from this webinar so you can see that if you'd like. Then there's this is the kind of big request. Please call your members of Congress. That's really important. If you live in Utah, if you live in Minnesota, if you live anywhere, this has to be a majority vote. So your senator or your representative might be the one that keeps it just under that 50%, 51% threshold. So please call your member of Congress and please ask your friends and family to call. You can send this document to whomever you'd like. If you know you have that one friend who's always up for some good trouble, if you have a sister or a niece or a brother who just loves to do this kind of stuff, please, 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 please share this. It would be helpful to call today, call tomorrow, make an agreement with yourself. I'm going to call before the new week begins. We have a couple of links here. You can find your representative or your senator. And then here's a suggested script. Of course, please feel free to adapt this. If you'd like to say something else, please feel free. This script is based on some talking points that might appeal to a wide variety of senators and representatives. So there's money. That's one of the talking points. There's a huge economy that's dependent on recreation on public lands, $128 billion a year. And that money comes from having really predictable rules for public lands. That's the first kind of suggested talking point. The second suggested talking point is that these management plans, they didn't pop up overnight. As Steve was saying, there was a lot of input, a lot of back and forth, a lot of, I don't want to say disagreement, but areas of tension that were resolved through really careful negotiations. And that approach led to something that worked best for everybody. So it was very carefully done and it protected those jobs. It was this really predictable, transparent process that businesses can feel confident that things aren't going to change overnight. The next talking point is that this Congressional Review Act is a sledgehammer. It's going to just smash those years of hard work. And that sledgehammer approach puts that big economic engine at risk. So it's just kind of continuing this kind of main idea is that we need this predictability in order to support this economic activity. That's a kind of talking point that a lot of members of Congress could get behind. And then finally, members of Congress want to hear, especially from people that they think are likely to vote. And it is probably pretty well known by this group that older women are the demographic that's most likely to vote. So saying, as an older woman, I'm calling on you to do the right thing. That will get their attention a little bit differently than, as someone who cares, I'm calling on you. Anything that signals to them that you are the type of voter that they really, really, really want to keep, all of that is really helpful. And personal stories matter. So I'm a grandmother, I'm a person of faith, I used to work on public lands. Having that kind of tailored, personalized messaging really gets attention in a way that, I'm a robot reading off a script. Like tailoring and personalizing really, really works. So finally, we would love to know how many calls are made. That's just helpful. You can imagine, Reggie was saying, getting in the media helps. And you can imagine Facebook post next week. 200 people called their members of Congress because no one wants this to move forward. It's just another opportunity to keep telling this story. So if you make a call, if your sister or your gadfly niece makes a call, if you have a moment, please just drop us a line. Just say, I called my senator, I called my representative. We will say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we will try and make hay, if we can, out of this great big momentum. I am going to stop sharing my screen now. We are slightly over time, and I want to make sure and respect everyone's time and wrap up.
Just real quick, Reba.
Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
I know most everybody probably knows about 5Calls, the app that you can load, and it's so easy to call. So if you don't have that, it just makes it simple to call your representatives. And we know how busy Congress is, and a lot of them, our representatives, probably don't even know anything about this. So even just a quick call that says, please vote no on any CRA bills that come across your floor. I mean, it can just be simple and quick. And maybe it sparks them, oh, well, what is that even? So just a couple closing words there.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, as Barbara says, calling is the main thing. So yes, this document will be shared by email. You'll get an email later today or possibly early tomorrow morning. Please feel free to share it widely. We would love for as many people as possible to see this. And this is the power of having a grassroots network. Everybody here is an actor and everyone has a friend who can also take action. So I want to just make sure and close it, but thank you again to Reggie. Thank you to Barb. Thank you in absentia to Steve, who made such a wonderful presentation on such a very, very, very busy day. And thank you all for being here. This is the kind of thing that makes a difference. So thank you for sharing part of your time, and thank you in advance. We have 50 people, I think we're here in total, so we'll have 100 calls by next week. Thank you all in advance for making those calls. I really appreciate it. And talk soon. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye.